Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Cropper here with Onar. We're going to be discussing some stuff that's come up in the latest discussion with Rucka. And there's a comment that you left just recently here, and I said we should discuss this. You said you're available, so here we are. What was the comment that we want to go over then? I've got it on the screen, but we can speak on it.
I don't actually know which comments you replied to, so which one
you
was
said...
it?
It was the one where I just had replied to. You said, if genes influence political proclivities, philosophy becomes even more important. So it's not that this makes philosophy unimportant. Like
it makes it more important.
Yeah, and like people with cerebral palsy, can they grasp the world the same way that a normal person can?
Obviously not.
I don't think so. So genetics has something to do with it, and then you give even more evidence for that. But that's an extreme case where philosophically we've got to figure out what to do with these people, and the fact that they lack the intelligence to grasp objectivism doesn't mean that we can, that doesn't lead us automatically to gas chambers or something insane like that. So
no, because if that's the conclusion, and like Rucka didn't say that, but and to be absolutely fair to him, your conversation with him was very fair-minded and very good, although a little bit frustrating at times because you were talking past each other and you didn't come to a resolution as much as I was hoping for. But so I wanted to clear up a few things. First, let me say, I think that Rucka just fundamentally has misunderstood my position. He thinks somehow I reject free will. I don't. What I'm saying is that we're not going to let neuroscience to the people who don't believe in free will, right? So the facts don't belong to those who are wrong. We have to own the facts, which means also owning the facts about genetics, about neuroscience and physiology. We can't just say we reject all of that and we're just going to pretend that none of those facts exist. Yeah. That's what, and I've never ever said that I reject the blank slate. On the contrary, I accept that we have our epistemologically a blank slate. In other words, I take the empiricist position, just like Stephen Hicks explained in his brilliant video. I do, however, reject the notion that we're psychological blank slates. Now, for some reason, this term blank slate recently has come to mean something other than the epistemological blank slate. So let me just clarify. Blank slate in the epistemological sense means we're born with no content. We have no ideas, no memories. Those have to be built. That's all it means. It doesn't mean that we're not born with a personality or certain personality traits or proclivities that can become traits at a later point. 2-month-old baby boys like to look at objects more than baby girls who like to look at faces. That's not a learned behavior. That's something that's innate, but it's not an innate idea. It's an innate proclivity of personalities, of interests, and so forth. And we can apply that to the whole spectrum, whether it's a neuroticism, how easy we get nervous about things, what kind of things you're interested in, and so forth. So I just wanted to have it out there that I do believe blank slate. We're not born with innate ideas, but the blank slate is curved or has a shape to it. So it's not random what we write on the blank slate. So the point that the comment that you made about my comment was, I said that if you have two groups, one group has no problems eating sugar. It doesn't matter if they eat sugar or not. It just doesn't come up. They can eat as much or as little sugar as they want. They're not going to become diabetic. And then you have another group which has genes which predisposes them for diabetes. Now, which one of those two groups would benefit most of knowing about genetics?
Yeah, the one that needs the information.
Yes. And in fact, knowing about the genes doesn't make you have less freedom. It increases your freedom because now you can actually live a healthy life. You have information to counteract something that you otherwise might not know about. To the person who has no genetic proclivity, choice doesn't come into it. It doesn't matter if he chooses to eat or not to eat sugar. It doesn't matter. So it has no impact on his life. So for him, free will is sort of, okay, that's nice to have. But for the person who has diabetes or has a proclivity to diabetes, now free will becomes immensely important, because if he makes the bad choice now, it's going to dramatically impact his life negatively. And if he's able to use his free will to make good choices so that he has a good diet and stays away from high carbohydrates and sugar, then he is going to be a healthy person. So in other words, it becomes more important.
Now, I want to apply this to the ANCAPs, who want everybody to be their own independent agent. Everybody's an independent agent. And some people aren't going to have the capacity to understand the situation. So, if we were objective about it, we would set up a situation where even people who don't really understand what's going on still cannot be put upon by the people who do understand what's going on. Right?
That's true, yeah.
So we have to admit there will be people in society with Down syndrome or cerebral palsy or whatever, and they're not going to know exactly what's happening day to day, and they're not going to get the wider picture. So what kind of a society do we build? We have to build one then where people who don't quite understand everything can still live a consensual life without being harmed by those around them. So philosophy is even more important if we have a group of people who aren't going to be able to grasp the wider picture.
Yes. And in fact, like as we talked about in one of the videos, someone who's very intelligent has a disadvantage philosophically, because he has the freedom to not engage with reality. He doesn't have to work with his hands. He doesn't have to get food every day to survive, because he's smart. He can do jobs that only live in his virtual world up in his head. And so therefore he has the freedom to be irrational to a much greater degree than someone who is governed by their stomach. So someone who's poor, doesn't have many skills and doesn't have a high IQ, still gets like reality beaten into it, or him or her, like beaten into his life, and can't avoid that. So what we often notice is that people of ordinary intelligence is far more objective than many people who, like in academia, who have IQs up in the stratosphere.
So a high IQ is no protection against danger. No. Yeah.
On the contrary, a high IQ is like a risk factor, just like diabetes.
Yeah. Look at the Jews, huh? They love Marxism and every kind of leftism.
That's right, and I'm thinking about writing a book about the Jews. I can safely do that because I'm a Zionist, meaning I support Israel, right?
Oh, okay.
That's Zionism. And what I do there is I do try to tackle this problem, why Jews, first of all, are so disliked by so many people across time, and why they appear to be so left-wing and so forth. And part of this is due to their high intelligence, because high IQ people are more likely to be atheists, and atheists are more likely to be communists. And that's
fair enough.
Yeah. So that's part of it. I don't want to go down that road, but Rucka was very upset about I'm promoting biological determinism by saying putting people on a spectrum politically with autism and open-minded and so forth. I just gave now an example of a provably genetic factor, which is intelligence, which is actually a risk factor for having bad ideas, which is high IQ. If you're just an average person, you might have bad ideas, but on average you don't, because you can't, because you have to cross the road without being killed. You have to have food in your stomach, and which means that most of the day you're just following reality. Whereas if you are super duper smart, you can just live out in outer space and don't have to have any contact with reality. And you are so smart, and especially if you have high verbal ability, like many Jews have, you are so good at bullshitting that you might even bullshit yourself. Like you might actually believe your own crap. Yeah. So the better you are at speaking, the more likely that you are, first of all, going to be able to bullshit other people and become high on yourself. But you are also equally likely to believe your own crap. That's a huge risk factor. And for those people, it's obvious that they still have free will, and philosophy becomes of paramount importance, precisely because they are at risk. So the average person, he can go, if people is just organized nicely around him so that everyone is objective, and he, through cultural osmosis, just absorbs good values, and he just crosses the road, eats and works to survive, then how bad can that be? Like he lives his life okay. He might not be a genius, but like he probably does okay. But if you are super duper smart, you actually have the capacity to be a complete idiot philosophically. Only very, very smart people can learn things that are complete hogwash.
This reminds me of some of the scientists at Los Alamos that were talking about civil disobedience and stuff, and one of them had a line of thought along these lines, that most people can't even conceive of doing something outside of the rule book. So if you're able to conceive it, then it's like almost your duty to try it and see if it's reasonable or something like that. I can't remember exactly what the line of thought was, but it's sort of what you're going with there, that most regular people just go along and do their thing, and the people who are really smart can get themselves into trouble.
Yes, because they have the capacity to get into trouble. So there was a smart guy once who said that it's in peacetime you can't really see what people are made of. You have to see them in war and when they're facing an adverse situation. Because it's only when you're faced with actual moral choices, where the moral choices has an effect, that you can truly see what people are made of. And this corresponds a little bit to the idea of if you're living in a desert, it doesn't matter if your roof is leaky or not, right? You have a roof, and you will never notice if you have a leaky roof.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
But once it starts raining, then that leaky roof is going to show a different behavior from the roof that's not leaky, right? So, in other words, you have hidden genes or hidden factors that are there, but the situation is not available. You don't have the right premises for this to bloom. So you might have some kind of low IQ person, like not a low IQ, but a normal IQ person.
Well, yeah. What can we do it just with a general, like every single human has a tendency towards violence under the right circumstances. And as long as society doesn't allow those circumstances, then we don't get the violence eruption.
Or we can say that people who actually have those tendencies towards violence may actually just be peaceful because they're cowards, or because there's no situation where they get a chance to live out their violent fantasies. Now, Antifa is a case where you have people who want to be violent, they're filled with hate, and they want to smash people's head and destroy people. And normal people can't do that. But they have found a way to hide behind like a moral face. They claim that they are communists, and then it's okay. So they really just want to smash people, but by saying that it's social justice, they can get away with it. So, in other words, the situation has to be right for certain tendencies to be expressed, or the potential for the tendencies to be. If you never ever see like alcohol in your life, alcohol doesn't exist. How can you become an alcoholic? Right? It's only like you might have a genetic predisposition, like many like tribal people do, like that was never exposed to agriculture. You might have a tendency towards alcoholism, but if you never ever drink alcohol or never ever see it, then you will never become an alcoholic. That's not because you made good choices. It's just because that the question never arose.
So the people who would be tempted into a violent lifestyle, they just have to do something else because violent lifestyles just aren't available to them in a good free country.
Yes, that's right.
But the people are there. They've got the desire. They've got the genes that could be turned on, if we want to put it in the most deterministic sense possible, right? You've got whatever. You've got the psychology. You've got the reactions, the ability. If you're put in a situation in the dark at night and somebody starts attacking you, you'll fight back. And the basic human ability to survive is there. And as long as we keep civilization to a certain level, then we don't have to turn that stuff on. Survival mode, animal mode.
That's right. And some people have more of this than others. I mean, everyone is different. Every individual has their certain like genetic proclivities, or not just genetic, epigenetic, like with interaction with environment, and based on choice.
When we say genetic like that, we're giving the strongest possible interpretation to it, because really your genetics, like you say, is just the backdrop, and then ideas are what really move you. But it's just like a tendency. Whether or not you eat sugar is the real thing. Your tendency to diabetes is the genetics, but you eating sugar is the real picture.
That's right. And like you think of the genes and all of these things as the wind blowing. Like you can go with the wind or you can go against the wind. It's harder to go against the wind, but you can actually do it.
Yeah, like as a male, I have a tendency towards violence compared to women. Do I become a boxer and lift weights every day? That's my choice. I can do that, or I can read books and poetry and paint instead.
That's right. So the very notion that we have physiological or genetic predispositions, proclivities that I call them, propensities, is not the same as that we are determined to do this. So I completely reject biological determinism.
Yes, now
100%.
I want to put in there real quick, hunger. Are we biologically determined because sometimes we get hungry and we can't think of anything besides we've got to get food? Does that mean we're biologically determined and we can't think for ourselves and we don't have free will because we have to get food sometimes?
Precisely. That's a good example, because it's actually a feeling that you have, an urge that arises in consciousness. It's not just like a biological thing that you can't control. You feel it in your head.
And it takes over your thoughts, and it takes over your ability to concentrate, too.
That's right. So the alternative to biological determinism is not biological indeterminism, right? That's like that. This is what we've been talking about with DIM. Biological determinism is misintegration. And it's so easy to go from M directly to D.
Yeah.
It's that if we're not biologically determined, then we must be biologically indeterminate.
Right.
In other words, biology doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, but the integrated view is that we're biologically influenced And the best thing to do is to come to understand those influences, and our philosophy is to how to live in this world such as we are, with the influences, males being more violent than females, for example. We've got to deal with those influences. That's just the facts of life. And then philosophy is the way that we deal with reality. But understanding that men tend to be more violent than women does not destroy our ability to be peaceful people. Even though men tend to be more violent, still they can be peaceful.
Absolutely. And so I also wanted to pick up on something else that Rucka said. It's that, like, I was so we were talking race a lot, and he seemed to have missed the very first part of that conversation, the first conversation we had, where I said, I'm not interested in talking about race. I would have been very happy. I was very happy as long as we just went along being individuals and just things happened. The chips fell where they fell. But then someone just had to bring race into it. So now you have the alt-right and you have the progressives, races, that just have to talk about race all the time. And they are saying that I, because of my skin color, I'm evil. I'm born evil. And there's no redemption for me. And the only way I can sort of get some sort of forgiveness is if I denounce my identity as a white person, and I denounce and I sort of I repay this by accepting that the only correct thing to do is to allow lots of socialists into the country, and that will dismantle individualism, that will dismantle capitalism. This is the only way I can redeem myself, I'm being told. And this is not me making this up. I mean, you can hear the progressives say that capitalism is racist because it's meritocratic, and meritocracy is racist. So what they're really saying here is that if the best person wins, then whites will always win. That's what they are saying. Right? It's like, what? So therefore, they want to dismantle capitalism because they want to have brown politics. They are the ones saying that, not me. They're saying capitalism is white. Logic and reasoning is white.
Yeah.
This is not me saying that. They are like in academia. There's an entire movement now in academia which is called decolonization. Decolonizing academia. Anyone can go and Google this, and there that you will find people talking about science being white.
Yeah, white and science.
Not black science, but like black magic, right? But what they're saying is that
now that's good though. Black magic, white science. That's good. Okay. Yeah. All right.
So what they're saying, and this, I'm not making this up. You can search this for yourself. They're saying that in order to acknowledge that there are other kinds of knowledge other than white knowledge, we should allow witchcraft into academia. And because in Africa, witchcraft is a big thing, and South Africa has now introduced a Bachelor of Science in Witchcraft in their university.
Well, we've got pretty close to that. We have non-healing or healing non-touch healing, and stuff like that. That actually happens in our schools.
And we have environmental sciences too. So that's the same thing. That's witchcraft, right?
Yeah.
Once something has been touched by the plastic demon, it is irredeemable. And it can only be redeemed through recycling. Yeah.
And social justice warrior garbage is not too far from witchcraft. I mean, it's it's definitely got all of the fear and the dogma and everything.
Yeah, But notice again that the postmodernists that support this, they are aligning themselves with someone who they don't necessarily agree with, but they have a shared enemy, and which is reason, which is science. They don't like that. So if they are aligning themselves with the witchcraft people, the black Africans who like witchcraft, and I want to stress here, a lot of blacks, both in America and in Africa, are deeply offended by the notion that witchcraft is a black thing. So I find it offensive on their behalf. So it's a very derogatory thing to say that blacks just don't have what it takes to be rational. What the hell? So, and again, this is not me saying it, and it's not the alt-right saying it. It's the progressive left.
Yeah.
And so the reason I'm talking about this now is that I really don't care about talking about race. I wouldn't mind if it never came up, but it has come up, and I'm being told now that I'm evil, and so the question now becomes, who owns the facts? And we're now saying, no, we have to let the alt-right and the progressive left own the facts. Only they shall now speak of the facts. No, I don't accept that. Facts is always on the side of reason. And therefore we should talk about the facts. And I don't really want to talk about IQ differences in groups and all that. I don't really care about that. We can talk about that also, but the most important thing is to take ownership in the fact and say that the crazy people on the left and on the alt-right, which is really the reason they call themselves alternative right is because they're not really on the right. They're left wing, right?
Yeah, they're an alternative to everything going on the right.
That's right. So that's the alt-right. So, but taking ownership of facts is not the same as saying I'm now giving in to what the alt-right or the progressives are saying. That's crazy. Yeah. I'm saying no. There's an alternative way of interpreting these facts.
Yeah.
And we should do that.
We should try to interpret the facts instead of just using them for a narrative, which is what the racists do. They just use the facts for a narrative, right?
So that's precisely right. And like, if no one talked about IQ and race and all of that, fine, it would never come up. It would be fine. But since they are bringing it into the conversation, and not just that, but they're using it as a weapon to destroy capitalism, to destroy individual rights, to destroy reason, to destroy academia, to destroy everything, why on earth shouldn't we respond to that? I don't see why that is a bad thing to respond to.
Well, I think it's vital for us to respond. For example, we can easily counter their arguments. If they say we should only let Europeans in because they have a higher IQ than blacks, so only Europeans should be allowed to immigrate, then I say, well, why should we want any Europeans? Let's have only the Oriental people immigrate because they're higher IQ. And same thing with violence. If they say blacks are too violent and crime-ridden, we shouldn't let them in. I say, okay, then why should we let white people in? They seem to be a lot higher crime rate than Oriental and Japanese people. So that every which way they turn with their racial narrative, we can argue against it using the facts. And are we gonna make an IQ regime? If there's going to be an IQ regime, white people are going to have a lot of people on the bottom of it, and they're going to have black masters above them. So an IQ regime, fine, but it's not going to be racial.
Absolutely not. It's not going to be racial. And I also want to bring into the conversation that it's particularly the brainy people in academia, the intellectuals, especially on the left, who are sort of feeling some kind of moral indignation on behalf of blacks or others not just blacks, but any people of low IQ.
Yeah.
Because they're saying that it's offensive to say that someone has a low IQ. And what does that actually tell you about them? In their heads, these people who have these Ivy League educations, and they go up in these fancy intellectual circles, the elites, the cognitive elite, they go around thinking about themselves as the fine wine of society. They are so much better than others because they are smart.
They're the philosopher king class.
That's right. And they value IQ above anything. That's why it becomes a cognitive dissonance the very moment that they're faced with the statistics showing that one racial group scores higher than another racial group. Because according to their own values, they now have to say that they are, for instance, white supremacists.
Yeah.
Because now they value IQ higher than, they value IQ more than philosophy, for instance. Mm-hmm. And what I'm saying, if I have a choice between an objectivist with an IQ of 85 and a Marxist with an IQ of 150, I know which one I'm choosing. Mm-hmm.
Now, I do want to mention what you were saying earlier, that these people who have a lower IQ and they just have to deal with reality every day, I find them to be, on average, more honest on a personal, day-to-day, common sense level. And I was always able to tell who was an honest, good guy when the tractor broke down or when the machinery got plugged or when there was a flat tire, because the reasonable, rational, good people were able to take action in a situation when reality demanded it. And the idiots would stand around asking what to do or expecting somebody else to do it for them. So. Indeed.
And that's a good observation because, like most people are actually quite reasonable, like the average person. But the so-called problem with the ordinary person, he swears, he uses bad language, he calls people idiots, he calls them the R word, like retard or whatever. I'm not supposed to say that, but I'm just saying what they're saying. And so they use coarse language, right? And because of this, the very brainy people, the fine wine, the high intellectuals, they look down upon them as the mere common people who have this, who are uncivilized brutes, who can't speak these fine velvet words that they are speaking. Right. But just because you can't formulate yourself in an eloquent manner doesn't mean that you have bad values. It just means that your IQ is not sufficiently high to be able to formulate fancy words. That's all it means.
That's what political correctness is all about, is let's force our values onto these people by changing the way they speak.
I think that there was a wonderful movie by Clint Eastwood. I forget what it's called. And there's this guy who was in Vietnam, played by Clint Eastwood, and he is an old grumpy man. He hates his children because they are just losers, and he moves into an area with Vietnamese living there. And he calls them chinks and stuff like that. Like, he uses coarse language, and he swears and uses really bad language. But in the end, his coarse language, you see through the coarse language, and he makes friends with them, and he keeps calling them chinks, right? But no one reacts to the language because they can see through the language. And in the end, I'm not going to tell the end in case someone wants to see that, but he proves himself to be a decent guy, and it's a good movie. So the point is, he displays very politically incorrect language.
Is it Gran Torino?
I think so. It might be that. Let me see. Gran Torino. Clint Eastwood. Let me just see which one it is. I will see if I can recognize it. Gran Torino. It looks like the one.
Yeah, I think that's it. If I remember, I've seen it. It's very
that's
very
the
good.
one.
Pretty good movie. Yeah.
It's a deep, and some objectivists didn't like it because of the ending. But I would say that if you see it in context, it's not an altruistic movie, but it's quite decent. I enjoyed it a lot. But okay, so my point with the movie was that coarse language is that's what we call the working class. They speak like that. Look at a football match in Europe. They scream and they swear and they shout and they're behaving in a brutish manner. And football, European football, soccer, is also a very brutish form of sport. It's a contact sport. It's a working class sport. So they like it for that reason, because there's a lot of like bang action. And this is just how ordinary people work. And if you're very snobbish, you will reject that as awful, like deplorables. Hillary Clinton is a perfect example of a snob, an intellectual snob. She thinks of the deplorables, like the common people, the people with an IQ below 120, as like the most god-awful near apes ever to have existed, right? And she thinks that all of them have bad values. They're Islamophobes, homophobes, all of this, the drill. And that's just not true. They might wear these red caps and they might vote for Trump, but that doesn't mean that they have bad values. You just have to sort of see through their average IQ in order to see that behind this, if you see them through the right lenses, they're quite okay people.
Well, they're a lot better than the Democrat voters.
Much better.
Yeah, I think they're quite morally upstanding people to be able to vote for Trump in spite of his crass behavior. They saw he is fighting the establishment, and they voted for him massively.
Yes, and I've seen now, I know that you've criticized Bill Whittle. I follow Bill Whittle, and he has two other guys that are on his shows regularly. So he has a show called Right Angle, where he meets up with two other guys. And one of the other guys was very much against Trump in the beginning. And I sort of thought like he's come around. He will vote for Trump this time around, even though he was initially almost a never Trumper. And he's just come to see the humor in the guy. So, for instance, one turning point for him was a tweet by Trump where Kim Jong-un had made a bad remark about Donald Trump. And he says, I don't know why he calls me an old something. I don't remember what it was. And he says, I would never call him short and fat. So I don't know why he calls me old. That's just he's troll master, and he releases all these memes. Like he released a meme with a picture of Trump Tower in Greenland, saying, "I will never do this to Greenland." Right?
Yeah, that's what I would love to see. I would love to see Trump Tower in Greenland.
Yeah, and recently he said that there was a certain chance that the Dorian hurricane would hit Alabama, and then everyone went ballistic in the media and said, "That's a lie. He must be impeached." Right? It's crazy.
I saw Don Lemon actually spent 7 minutes talking about it. 7 minutes.
And then he released a little video, a cat video, with a picture of Donald Trump pointing to this Hurricane Dorian, the famous, and then you have a cat in front that's chasing like a laser. She's literally telling you that you're being distracted. It's such a brilliant troll move. So people are starting to catch on. Like, some of these things are just too funny, and it's very coarse. It's not very intellectual, but it's funny, and you have to laugh at it.
Well, I'm worried about John Bolton. I hope that comes out well. He's been fired.
He's been
fired.
Oh, I've not been paying attention to that at all.
Just happened, very fresh. Happened.
Oh, I can't make any statements on that. I don't know anything about that.
Yeah.
So
it's unfortunate.
Okay. So
I'm looking for the silver lining. I've been going through comments on Facebook and everything everybody's posted, and I'm looking for the silver lining. You know, sometimes there's a silver lining with Trump, and so I'm looking for it. So look into it and let me know what you think later.
I'll do that. So speaking of conspiracy theories, I like to entertain myself with this Q conspiracy, that Trump is really a mastermind behind Q. And of course, I don't believe that that's the case. But what I've noticed is that this Q guy, whoever he is, he has a lot of insight, and he's able to push people in certain directions to think on their own. They think that he has a message from Trump, but in reality, he's just pointing to facts that that are in the public and that people should look at. So it's interesting to see how he can use people's belief that this is actually Trump behind the scenes in order to draw attention to facts that people otherwise wouldn't want to look at.
So what they're saying is that the facts of reality seem to indicate Trump's views, and that annoys them when someone points out the facts of reality, because they're like, quit talking about Trump.
That's right.
Now, how does it Q? Is just capital Q conspiracy?
Yeah, you QAnon. QAnon.
QAnon?
Yeah, in 2 words, QAnon.
QAnon conspiracy.
You don't have to have the conspiracy, just QAnon.
Oh, well, Google put it in there for me.
Oh, okay, of course, but it's Google wants you to know that it's a conspiracy, right?
Uh-huh.
That's a conspiracy.
That's a conspiracy.
Okay, yeah. We're getting off a little bit off track here, but it's an interesting topic. But so my point here was that in this case, many of the Trump supporters have medium range IQ. And a lot of people are offended by Trump supporters and by Trump himself for talking at the level of people who, like a nine-year-old level, like a 4th grader. Now, people don't understand that he's not at a level of 4th grade. He speaks at the level of 4th grade because he wants everyone to understand him. That's actually a commendable thing. Why should that be a bad thing? It's very inclusive. They talk about inclusivity. And when he actually starts including people with low IQ and low language skill into his conversation, then they get outraged. So because they are IQ snobs.
They want him to be exclusive. They want him to be elite. They want him to be above the crowd. They want him to be their pet. They want the president to be the pet of the left.
That's right. Notice now, I wanted to just make a point of, notice how much nice thing I have to say about people who are not super smart. And I have a lot of things to say about a lot of super smart people. Not that they're not bad because they're super smart, but they have a risk factor because they're smart. So it's not like I'm saying, it's so easy to fall into the trap that's saying one group is smarter than another group, therefore this group that's smarter is better. But notice who thinks like that. It's IQ snobs, right?
Well, that
elitist.
Leonard Peikoff went over that pretty thoroughly in the Ominous Parallels. He says, Nazism didn't happen in some backward place. It happened in the land of poets and philosophers. And the gas chambers were not designed and built by commoners. They were designed and built by the PhDs, by the people who had been through the universities and graduated universities. The elites built the gas chambers.
And he makes a very important point. The first people who adopted Hitler and the Nazis were the academics.
Mm-hmm.
So he did big. He made it big in the universities first. That's where he first got his big support. And then only later did a lot of people start voting for him. And actually, most people never voted for him.
Right. He won with 34%, I think it was.
The most he had was 40%. That's a sizable amount, but 60% voted for something else, right?
Yeah, but too many. There were too many of the other. He was the largest single group. His group was a plurality.
Yeah, but you also have to think about it that probably not more than, I don't know the exact numbers, but maybe like 60s or like 70% of the population voted. So 40% out of 70 is 28%. Right. So 28% of the people who had the capacity to vote voted for Hitler. So that's like, the numbers are actually quite small. Most people don't care about politics, right? So even in Germany, we're making like a collective judgment of Germany based on what 28% of the people wanted.
They're 28% most educated and most liberal.
And notice that out of those 28%, a lot of them voted for Hitler, not because they wanted to gas the Jews, but because he promised to build the Autobahn and to create jobs and uplift people from poverty, and create structure and order. So most people don't understand it, but Hitler, compare the political platform of Hitler to the Social Democrats. There's no difference there. But he has a little bit he has one or two points that you can say, okay, that sounded a little bit Nazi, like about the Jews and about certain things like that. But on most like economic policies, you can't tell the difference between him and just an ordinary social democrat.
Oh, did you see my video where I went through his 25-point speech, a Nazi Party 25-point platform, and I read like 14 or 16 of them? And
I didn't see that, but I've done a similar exercise, just like that. So yeah, so I'm quite familiar with like. He was just an ordinary politician in terms of what he actually ran on. Hitler didn't have one single new idea. He was just doing what was in the culture. And that was the point. What culture was he in? He was in the culture of Kant, of the brainiest people on the planet. The average IQ of Germany is among the highest in the world. And they had among the most educated people in the world, and they had the philosophers and the poets, right? And that's where precisely there is where Nazism took root. And I think that's the reason why the snobs intuitively, instinctively are so angry about the Nazism, because there's something there that indicates that being an intellectual snob leads down the path of Nazism, right?
I think a lot of them are really actually convinced that Nazism is on the right and communism and socialism are on the left.
Now they are, but now history's been rewritten. We can't forget the Frankfurter School, which is like a bunch of Marxists who were the first thing they did when they came to America is to rewrite history to destroy America and to place the Nazis on the far right based on just bullshit. I think it's Adorno was one of these guys who did that. So he's responsible for placing the fascism and Nazism on the right by looking at like, they had a father figure, and people on the right, they like fathers. Stuff like crappy stuff like that. And so he sort of ignored all the socialist stuff.
There's nothing on the right about it. There's racism is from the left. I mean, if you come to America and you say the racist, where's the racist group? Well, it's the KKK. It's the Democrats in the Old South. So if racism is on the left and socialism is on the left, then where is Nazism? It's racist socialism. So
National Socialism. National Socialism. And if you read the work by Hermann Goering and Goebbels and all of these, they were very clear that this is socialism. And it's a very special kind of socialism based on the German race, but nevertheless, socialism, right? So racism is largely, and this is one of the reasons I talked about this psychosis, or the open-minded versus the border-minded people. It's more natural. You tend to lean towards thinking in generalizations. If you are open-minded, you tend to generalize. So if you see a certain group of people doing something, it's easier for you, if you're open-minded, to say that's a general rule. You abstract that, say that that's true for the whole group. So in other words, you tend to think in terms of racism or in sexism and so forth. Now, what I didn't say is that if you know that you're open-minded, then you can actually know that there's so much risk associated with that you can discipline yourself, just like with diabetes, right? It's important to know all the negative side effects of your proclivities and all the good stuff, all the good and the negative, so that you can optimize all the good stuff while toning down all the negative stuff.
So this is like Leonard Peikoff saying that he was always tempted towards rationalism, and he always had to check himself and move back away from rationalism.
Yes, and in fact, if he had not been exposed to objectivism, he would not have had the tools to even know that he was predisposed to rationalism.
Yeah, or that there was any problem going on with his thinking. Yeah, exactly.
So in other words, objectivism in this case it was the equivalent of a gene test. It's not genes, but like he was able to use objectivism to self-identify that he has a proclivity towards rationalism. And we don't care why he has that proclivity, but the wind is blowing in that direction. And if he just zones out and goes on default mode, it doesn't think, then he's going to veer off towards rationalism.
Now, I want to make take an example here of men versus women. If you don't have explicit philosophy, you're just going through your daily life, and you notice these things about women being weak and liking a strong man, and you notice these things about men being brave and being violent, you might just take that too far and overgeneralize and think that there's something really important about the essence of men, which is strength, and the essence of women is femininity, and you can never abstract from them the rational human being that is actually the essence of them, because you're thinking too much along these lines of things which are tendencies right there in reality, just in the nature of a human being. So
yes, that's a very good point, because I mean, misintegration is something people tend to do a lot. Most of the time, misintegration is not that dangerous, because if you are not very powerful, if you have a misintegrated concept, there's just limited damage with what you can do with misintegration. So an average person with average IQ and average education, average job responsibility, and so forth. Okay, so what if he integrates some concept wrong? It's going to perhaps give him some negative effects in his own personal life, but it's not going to bother the rest of us, most likely. But what if you have Che Guevara misintegrating something? And he says, well, I'm just going to take over all of Cuba, and I want to nuke New York, right? Now, Cuba was very close to getting nukes. And if if you have put nukes in the hands of a misintegrated person, then you have a problem. Houston, we have a problem, right? And this is my point, that the more powerful you are, the higher IQ you have, the more education you have, the more talented you are, the more responsibility you have, the more important philosophy becomes, the more a misintegration or a disintegration error actually makes.
You know, on second thought, maybe we should be a little bit extra worried about the Chinese and their particularly high IQ and their propensity for math and their desire for world domination. Maybe we had ought to put one extra check mark next to the worry box.
Yeah, I see your point. So my main point here is that when
Frank's
when
red hot.
Ruck-
I put
Sorry.
that on everything.
when Rucka is sort of focusing on race and IQ like this, he's thinking in the terms that those who have high IQ are automatically better than those who have a low IQ. And if we talk about it, it's going to create supremacy and all of these things. But here we have been trying to make a problem out of high IQ. That, of course, having a high IQ is great, just like having a very powerful gun is great. But if you have a nuke, then if you are putting a nuke in someone's hand, you better be sure that that person who has that very powerful weapon is responsible with it. So IQ is like a powerful weapon. You can use it for good or for bad, and the higher IQ you have, the greater your capacity for good and evil.
Yeah, I would rather the nukes be in the hand of some moral cowboy than in the hand of some genius.
Precisely. Again, I'm not talking about race because this is something that's very close to my heart. But we're in a situation now where race has been weaponized. And you're only given two alternatives: either you're racist or you're really racist. Yeah. Those are the only two alternatives you're given, and I don't accept that. So I want to get back to one point that Rucka said. Rucka said that we can't trust IQ science because it's in the hand of bad people with bad philosophy, and if you haven't taken philosophy into account, then you have to dismiss it. Well, he drives a car. He uses a computer, he uses a cell phone, he flies. All of these things are built with people who don't have a perfect philosophy. There's a lot of bad stuff going on in modern physics. I'm a physicist, so I happen to know that quite well. But even so, I have no problems trusting my computer. Like I trust the technology around me because it's built by engineers who are fairly reality-oriented. So you don't have to have a perfect philosophy in order to produce things that are sufficient science. So I think he's making a bad mistake by dismissing science because they don't have to reach up to the Platonic heaven of the philosophical perfection.
Yeah,
you will never.
It's a bizarre position that he takes. Because one wonders what would be a racial study or whatever the studies that he seems to be dismissing that did take, quote unquote, all the philosophy into account. I mean, how can you dismiss like the bell curve and crime statistics and the fact that more men are murderers and the fact that more black people are in prison for murder, and how do you dismiss all of that? Like not just one study by one author in one book, but the whole field over decades, over years. It's like, what? Why is it so scary? What are they? Is this projection? Are they afraid of what they will do if they believe this information? Are they gonna Like, if this information is true, then we'll have to put in a government plan. And what is that government plan going to look like? That must be their only thought, is what's the government plan going to look like if this information's true?
Notice that he immediately ran to eugenics. He said that you're going down a path which eventually might lead to eugenics, as if facts is like a one-way street to eugenics. It's like you have no free will. You're predetermined that if you start looking into the facts, then it's eugenics. First of all, the idea that you don't have any choice there, but you end up with eugenics is fairly bad. And the second thing is that eugenics was originally not in itself an evil idea. Eugenics means good heritage, good genes. So it doesn't mean anything other than you should care about the offspring, the genes of your offspring. So you should want your children to be as genetically prepared for reality as possible. And we do that all the time. When we pick a mate, we pick them based on indicators of good genes, like good looks, good health. All of these are indicators of good genes, right? So we already have in the choice of our mates built into it eugenics. What makes eugenics particularly toxic is that it got in very early in the hands of the progressives during the progressive era. And what do progressives do with absolutely everything? It doesn't have to be eugenics.
They make a state plan for it. They make a government plan.
Yes, they make a state fucking plan for it. So should we now never discuss economics because the progressives want to make a state plan for a planned economy?
Yeah. I don't know. You're talking about national steel production and national power production. This is exactly how the communists talked.
That's right. That's right. So like any topic that's touched by the progressives is going to lead down a very dark path. But just because we can't say that they own it, the progressives should not be allowed to own economics, because then we say, oh, we have to dismiss all this economics studies because it will lead to higher taxation. I mean, that's crazy. And or we have to dismiss the study of currencies and of money, the money theory, because it's going to lead to fiat currencies and inflation. Now, that's sort of like giving away your entire position even before you started. It's like in the Brexit negotiations where Theresa May said, we're not going to negotiate anything, and we're going to give up all our negotiation cards to begin with, and let's just hope that you're nice with us. And then all the Brexit people were saying, what the hell are you doing? You can't give away your negotiation cards. And this is the same situation. If you're saying that all the information that is currently being hijacked by some group, they have ownership of those facts or that entire field of study, then you're just giving up all your negotiation cards. This is, for instance, what the Christians did with evolution. Karl Marx, the genius, evil genius that he was, said that if you believe in evolution, you can't believe in God. And then the Christians, complete idiots as they were, said, well, that sounds really smart. So they just dismissed the tool that builds upon, like, they believe in 99% of evolution, like in traditionalism and like the conservative worldview and all of that. That's evolution. It's fatherhood, nuclear family, all of these things. All of that is the conservative position. But Karl Marx was able to say, only atheists can talk about evolution. And they bought it. They say, okay, we don't own evolution. Now we give it to the communists. And the first thing Karl Marx said, okay, now we own evolution. What do? Oh, we dismiss evolution. Social Darwinism, bad. We're not going to have evolution in anything to do with humans. And evolution does not apply to the neck and above. it doesn't apply to the brain and so forth. And we're not going to talk about genes and IQ and all those things that have to do with evolution. So, because it interferes with their communist utopia. So, what the Christians did is that instead of taking ownership of evolution, just like Jordan Peterson now has done, on behalf of the Christians, which is now turning the tide. We're having a Copernican reversal, where the Christians are rushing over to the evolution side, and all the progressives are running over to the creationist side.
Because the progressives can't face science, and the Christians are on the individualist scientific right, where people are sane and where there's open debate and discussion.
And they just realize all of a sudden when Jordan Peterson has been talking about evolution, that first of all, evolution in and of itself does not disprove God. I mean, there are other reasons for not believing in God, but evolution is not one of them. Because you can imagine that God interferes in evolution and all of these things.
Sure, God did that too. Sure, God did that too. God did everything else and evolution. Evolution is also God's trick.
Yeah, why wouldn't they go for that? So, and now they're coming to that position. They're saying, "Oh, I'm starting to believe in this evolution thing because all of those good things that are in the Bible, I find in evolution, right?" Snake in the garden, where that evolution is afraid of snakes. 50 million years ago, our ancestors were eaten by snakes. And we're still talking about snakes in the garden, right?
Yeah.
So they're coming around to this because of Jordan Peterson. So everyone who's trash-talking Jordan Peterson, they're not with it. They don't understand that he's taking Christians from creationism and bringing them over to the position of science. I don't care what he's saying. If he's able to make creationists believe in evolution, he's a good guy. Like, I don't care about all the other stuff.
All right, fair enough. And Christopher Hitchens and company have already moved most of those Christians away from a hardcore Christianity into a soft Christianity where there's probably not a God, but they go to church anyway.
That's well, actually, now Jordan Peterson is partially reversing that. We're having atheists going to church and enjoying that, even if they don't believe in. So he's going the other way.
Yeah, but, even if they don't believe in God, though, that's the key. Is they've given up religion. They're going back to church, but they don't believe it anymore. So the problem is, one generation or two generations from now, their kids are going to take it seriously again, and that's the problem.
Yeah. Yes, it's like they want to believe. It's like X-Files. I want to believe. And that's the position they're in right now. But so, like, if you have a choice between a Christian who believes in evolution and an atheist who believes in creationism, who are you going to go for? I'm going for the Christian evolutionists every single time.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I don't like leftists. Almost any conditions, I don't like leftists. So the point is that Christians are only now starting to understand that they're being suckered. That they were taking. Karl Marx came in the night and stole their clothes. He stole evolution from them by tricking them with this apple thing in the garden. Oh, okay. So, and now they're understanding that evolution is neutral when it comes to a religion. You can fit it perfectly well into any religion you like, but you don't have to give up science. And if this makes Christians more scientifically oriented and evolutionary oriented, that's a good thing. Yeah, that's good, and especially if it comes on the heels of this big atheist movement that's de-powerized a lot of the religion, and then we move them away from creationism. That's a good 1-2 punch. I'm still scared about what Jordan Peterson's ultimately doing, though, making religion popular again and saying that he won't say that he doesn't believe in God and all that stuff. I'm still worried about that. But okay, I like this. I like him moving people away from creationism.
If that's all he does, moving them away from creationism and cleaning up their room and taking responsibility, I'm fine with that.
He's got Gavin McInnes going back to church now, though, and company. Gavin McInnes and others.
I'm still not very getting very excited or
You're not too worried about this?
I'm not worried at all. No, absolutely not. Like, if that's the worst crime he has ever committed, going to church, I'm not worried. So Christians, generally speaking, don't scare me at all. If you have they're most, to quote Douglas Adams, Douglas Adams, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The Christians are mostly harmless.
That's fair. I know. I grew up in Utah where there was child rape and child brides and people married at the age of 12 and multiple brides, and so it doesn't take them much to go back to being really naughty if they have the chance.
That's true, but I want to sort of give Mormonism its due. I want to give one excuse. Mormonism is young. And almost anything that's new is bad, right?
And almost all religions start off as sex cults.
That's right. But then they just sort of prune off the bad stuff. And then they are left after the thing that survives after a long time is usually quite harmless. Right?
Harmless, yeah. Inane, maybe. Something like that.
I'm not making a very strong case for religion here. I don't misunderstand me here. So.
Yeah, I'm saying you're really not making a very good case for religion.
But I'm sort of like, I'm trying to make a case why I'm not sweating over it either.
Right.
It's like,
no, I'm more worried about environmentalism and the green religion.
Yes, and the M2 type Islam. Because Islam is a totalitarian system. It's not a religion. It's a political system. It's a religion. It's a religious political system. So it's communism with God, right?
Well, it's just like if you have a bunch of Christians come to your country, the stuff they're preaching is going to end up leading to the overthrow of your dictatorship. You know, I mean, Christians have a coherent political view too. I mean, it doesn't follow exactly, but generally speaking, the Christian view is that each individual person is their own, is accountable to God and nobody else.
Yeah. I want to talk about one thing that I sort of mentioned in a comment earlier that we never got back to. It was after our dim conversation. And I just by coincidence heard Jordan Peterson talking about Ayn Rand. And what he said, he was defending himself. I'm not I'm thinking about things like community and responsibility beyond the individual. I'm not like Ayn Rand, who's into atomistic individualism.
That's right. I heard him say that, and it struck me from you saying that there's the D and the M, and the atomism is D, and then collectivism is the M, just going too far with groups and going nowhere with groups. But the I would be that you get together with your bowling friends on Thursday night and you go bowling and you have fun because it's your group of friends. Even though you're not a collectivist, you still like to hang out with a group of friends. So you're not atomistic and you're not collectivist who thinks every time you're alone you're being evil and you always have to be with the group.
That's right.
Yeah, do you want to say more about it, or did I just wring that subject dry?
I think that you did a good job there, and my only point was that Jordan Peterson is a confused person because he mixes things together that shouldn't be mixed together. So, for instance, he calls himself pragmatic, right? and a pragmatist.
He means practical. He doesn't know what he means, does he?
No, because he has learned that being principled, means being dogmatic, right? So he confuses the two.
Yeah. In his view, principles are dogmatism.
But if you listen to how he actually talks and how he actually behaves, then his view of so-called pragmatism has nothing to do with being unprincipled. In fact, much of what he's talking about is to arrive at an abstraction from practical work. You start out with, he talks about Piaget, where you sometimes you learn the behavior, you're able to act out the behavior before you're able to abstract the rules of the behavior. So little kids can play a game together, but if you ask them what are the rules of the game, they're not actually able to formulate it. So, and what he's saying is that this is not just true for 2-year-olds. This is true throughout history. We're acting out a game, and we sort of have a vague notion of what we're pointing, in which direction we're pointing.
Well, I can imagine this for making a tool, and you vaguely know what the shape of the tool is you need, and you make one, and then it doesn't quite work, or it works kind of, but you see where you can improve it, and eventually you learn how to make this tool, but when you set out, you didn't know how to make the tool.
And one of the things that I think that is important that he says, he very often uses the term sacrifice. I've listened very specifically, and Jeroen Broek has done the same, and we've come to the same conclusion, that every time he uses the term sacrifice, he doesn't mean it in an altruistic sense. He means it in investment for future gain.
Yeah, he mixes up the idea of investing and sacrificing. Yeah.
But then I thought that he was mixing it up. But then I realized that he actually is pointing towards something that I'd never considered before. So I learned something new from him based on his partial confusion, but partially also understanding something real. Because what he's saying is, he said that we discovered the future. That's the greatest discovery of all time. That we can actually give up something now for gain in the future. So he says that that's the greatest discovery of all time. But he says that in the beginning, people didn't have a very good understanding of this. They couldn't formulate the concept of the future. But they understood that there's something about doing something now, giving up something now to gain something in the future that they need to act out, so that they can understand. So they started sacrificing, making a sacred offering to the gods, which was sort of their preconceptual, bumbling way of visually representing what the future is. They're saying, look at me now, I'm giving up something now, and I'm doing it because it's going to lead to something good in the future.
Yeah, in my view, it's kind of the lazy, mystical way. I mean, the real objective way of getting something from the future is to go out and plow your field. The mystical way is to burn one of your sheep on an altar of sacrifice to try to get the rain to come. So it's probably short-sighted mystics who wanted to get something free from the universe who invented this shit, and meanwhile there was a hard-working guy out there actually plowing the field who actually got the crops to grow. But anyway...
Yeah, but you have to also take into account that when we discovered the future, as humans, we probably had an IQ around 60, 50,000 years ago. And for someone who has an IQ of 60, and to make that kind of discovery, that's a paramount discovery, but someone with an IQ of 60 is not going to be able to formulate that very well.
Somehow I think it was a guy with an IQ of 85 and everybody else had an IQ of 60, and they kept on working in the fields, and he was like, I will now burn a sheep to get more rain, and they were like ooh.
They were really impressed by that.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, to return to what we said earlier, it's usually the eggheads and the overeducated people that give us the problems, really.
Yes, and of course, it's also the eggheads that give us like the inventions and all that. But it's definitely a double-edged sword.
Knowledge,
Okay, but
knowledge, as the Bible tells us, is
yes. I just wanted to complete this thing about I learned something from Jordan Peterson. He's a psychologist, and he says something very profound, which is that your body. This is, if you've seen this Star Wars reviewer, Mr. Plinkett. It's wonderful, and he keeps on saying, "You didn't notice it, but your brain did." It's a brilliant thing to say, and what he's really saying is that you have conceptual understanding, but your body is not conceptual. Your body is perceptual. It lives only on the perceptual plane, and perception is now. It's only now. So your perceptual being, your perceptual consciousness, doesn't know the future and can never know the future. So it's like you have two little people inside you. You have one perceptual man and you have one conceptual man. And the conceptual man, he sees something in the future, and he wants to make an investment. He wants to give up something good right now in order to gain something in the future. The perceptual man inside you can never know the future, so he can only feel the pain right now. So your perceptual being feels that as a sacrifice and can never experience it as an investment. Your conceptual being can understand it. But this is the reason why we can't just make like a New Year resolution, say, I will now exercise 5 times a week, and I will lose 40 pounds this year, and I will do this and do that. You can't. The conceptual man can't command perceptual man to do whatever he wants, because perceptual man only sees the now, and it's therefore everything has to be presented in a way that it's in the now, and then you bumble along. That's the elephant, right?
Now, perceptual man does get to tell conceptual man what to do, like if he's hungry or tired or horny or something like that.
And conceptual man can control perceptual man because we have conceptual free will, right? But that doesn't mean that there isn't a fight going on.
Well, the conceptual man controls perceptual man by setting up conditions over the long term, like making sure that he's fed, making sure that he's clothed, making sure that he's well slept and nutrition and whatever else. So conceptual man gets control of perceptual man and keeps him happy, and then he has free time over and above that to work on being conceptual man.
Exactly. But my point is that Jordan Peterson has noticed that what Ayn Rand called investment for the future, that's a real thing that lives in conceptual space, in our conceptual consciousness. But since our perceptual body can never know that, it is experienced as a real sacrifice. So therefore, there is actually a legitimate usage of sacrifice we can call it let's call it a rational sacrifice. A rational sacrifice means that you are giving up something now for the future, right? That's an investment. Sure. But the term sacrifice here recognizes that it's painful, and it's going to be, part of you is going to experience it as a sacrifice, even though another part of you knows that it's future you is going to enjoy this.
For example, it's like going to the gym, right, is the example. Going to the gym is the example, right?
Yes. So there's a funny episode with Homer Simpson when he's like drinking like crazy, and he says, hope future me is going to hate this, but that's his problem. So it's a good way of conceptualizing this. It's like, so I'm not saying that we're sort of embraced sacrifice and all of that. I'm just saying that the way that people are using the word sacrifice is actually, it has two meanings: the philosophical meaning, altruism, and the other one is actually not so bad, meaning investment in the future, but it feels now for your body right now as a sacrifice. So I think that when Ayn Rand secularized the term altruism, or she was secularizing language, trying to separate language from religion, she made one possible error, and it's just a linguistic error, because the word, I was actually quite shocked by this, but the word altruism is very recent, it's very young. The first time it appeared was in 1853 or something like that. So it's only like a little bit more than like 150 years old, 160 years old. It's like, it's very recent.
Yeah, from Auguste Comte, the French guy.
Yes. And the point before that, people had a fleeting notion of what this sacrifice meant, but he sort of made it into an evil philosophy. And he secularized altruism. He said, well, people were sacrificing themselves to get investing in heaven, getting a reward in heaven. But when you say, well, heaven doesn't exist, but we still like sacrifice, but now you're just going to sacrifice just for the sake of sacrifice, then you get Ayn Rand's concept of altruism.
Yeah, only after that came, I see.
So, of course, going after that concept is very good, but maybe there should have been another kind of secularization. Maybe she should have attacked altruism as an evil concept and said, but I'm going to change the definition of sacrifice. The proper meaning, the rational meaning of sacrifice, is to give up something now for an objective gain later.
Yeah, we have a two-word phrase that does it. It would be handy to have one word, but we call it delayed gratification.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've got the concept, or can you have a concept that's two words? That's a concept, right?
So again, this is just a tiny syntactic or grammatical thing. I mean, words are important, but so we're not in any way saying that Ayn Rand was wrong about things. But is it a wise thing to say that sacrifice shall now only mean the meaning of Auguste Comte from 1853, and wipe out the meaning of the term going back thousands of years?
Right. Interesting. Should we let the left define what sacrifice means?
Again, it's giving the victory over to the evil people. Yeah. It's like the creationists. Like, oh no, I'm not going to believe in evolution because it means I can't believe in God. Which is like insane. So, and again, oh no, I'm not going to talk about race because that means that it's only racist to talk about race. Like, well, that's precisely why you should take the facts back, right? Yeah. Because you don't want them in the hands of freaking racists. And, oh no, I'm not going to talk about genetics and how it influences the mind, because only biological determinists believe that. Well, that's precisely why you want to take it back, because you don't want the biological determinists to own the freaking terms or the freaking facts about the brain and the genes. Because if you do, then all the people who are scientifically oriented is going to reject free will as a myth.
Yeah, that would be a bad situation to be in.
So I'm trying to paint a general situation here, is that every time we have a chance to take ownership of the facts, we should do so. but we should try to also make it very clear that we're doing it in order to reject the position. So accepting the fact about IQ is in order to reject the crazy stuff that's on the left and on the intellectual elites about IQ.
And we're able to point out why that's wrong only if we look at the facts.
Yes. And for instance, the fact that now we brought up this rational analysis about, well, IQ is very often a good thing to have, but it's also very dangerous. So it's a double-edged sword, and you need to take that into account. You couldn't have, like, an irrational IQ elite snob. He's not going to talk about that. Right. He doesn't have the rational framework to make that kind of analysis.
And no, they have the opposite view. They believe that it's the mob and the populace, the rabble rousers who vote Hitler in. It's the commoners. It's the commoners that voted Trump in. And yes. We are saying that it is the people who are connected daily to reality and have some notion of common sense and objectivity of the world. They're the ones who voted Trump in.
Yes. And sometimes you can fool these ordinary people. Like, there are a lot of normal people who believe in catastrophic man-made climate change. And I don't blame them, because they're just saying, well, I don't know anything about science, but I think that this IPCC thing, I've heard that's like 97% of the scientists in the world.
Yeah.
And they are saying that this is real.
And my government says it's real, and the local grocery store is charging for plastic bags because that must be a problem.
Yes. So what? There's no reason for them to be skeptical about that. And I completely understand that. Sometimes people make bad choices, the ordinary people. But most of the time they make good choices. And they're not so easily fooled. Look at, they actually voted Trump in. Like, if the powerful elites were so good at fooling people, how could they not be able to prevent Trump from being elected?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the goal. That's the best thing that's happened in the last 10 years is Trump winning.
Like, when I saw him, I predicted him winning, and when I saw him winning, I said, okay, he's probably going to do a lot of bad stuff, but we need some crazy guy to shake the box. And if we're lucky, he's going to be building a wall or something like that. I'm just temporarily stopping immigration so that we can catch a breather, so that we're not letting in all the socialists in the world. So that was my initial thing. But now that I see that he's appointing good Supreme Court justices, that's a good thing. And he's slashing bureaucratic regulations. Like, he's explicitly said that he wants to return to the 1960s level of regulation, basically 1/3 of today's level of regulation. And EPA is doing good things
by not doing anything.
Yes, and the education thing now, where he's dismantling all the crazy shit going on there. Like, he's doing a lot of good things, and I'm even getting like a little bit open-minded about him. He's not talking about China because he doesn't understand economics, and he doesn't understand tariffs. Like, it's not a zero-sum game, and he doesn't understand this, and blah 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 blah. He thinks that trade deficits is bad, and then comes this tirade about that. And yes, he might not be good at economics, but he sure understands cheating, and he understands that the Chinese are cheating at everything.
Mm-hmm. And he understands how to get to them. He understands tariffs is the way to put the pressure on them to stop all their cheating.
Yes. For him, this is not policy. This is war. And the very moment you understand that he's now proposing tariffs as a soft war on China, a retaliatory war, then it makes a lot more sense. And I actually didn't understand that about Trump when I gave him my go, like accepted that he would be president. But now I see that, wow, he's actually, like, he's been talking about China for like 20 years, 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
He was a pioneer. He saw this before. Like, he's actually a visionary. Like, things that I'm only now starting to focus a little bit more on. He was talking about that stuff way, way, way back when no one was talking about it.
Yeah, and all this, now I'm looking at the free trade of the 90s and the 2000s with a different eye. I'm thinking, okay, so that was a period when the liberals, the left-tards, shut down factories across America with American government policy and shipped them to China and enriched China during that period. That's what that was.
And what they should have done instead of this NAFTA agreement, they should have said, we're building economic free zones in Mexico, so that instead of shipping to China, we're shipping to Honduras and Mexico and our neighborhood, so that we're not flooded by illegal immigrants. That's what they should have done in the 90s.
Yeah, there are plenty of places. Or India. We could have at least developed India. Let's do a free trade zone in India, but...
Yeah. And but the reason I'm saying South America is because Latin America is the neighborhood of America. It's a backyard. Yeah. So it makes sense because there's no illegal immigration from India, right?
Right. So yeah. It definitely makes sense to develop South America. As far as cheap labor goes, though, if we had India and China to choose from, China's definitely the bad choice.
Yes. But we didn't have India and China to choose from. That was what the libtards said. China. And China, don't get us wrong, it's like China has a lot of smart people, and therefore they're able to do things better than many other people. Like the average IQ in Mexico is like around 90, whereas in China it's like 103. Just means that it's easier, and there's a billion plus people in China. So it's just through simple natural selection and an internal market, you can get like 100 million people with an IQ of 110 plus working in factories in China. And so it's no wonder that they were able to amass this massive production, because they have a lot of smart people to choose from. But that doesn't, again, having a high IQ is not necessarily a good thing. Not always. And it depends on it depends on the philosophy. And especially with high IQ people, philosophy is very important. And so China, bad philosophy, high IQ. Sounds like Germany, right?
Yeah, it looks bad. Like I was saying earlier, maybe we should be a little bit nervous about the Chinese.
And don't forget that Deng Xiaoping's socialism with Chinese characteristics can be interpreted as, well, national socialism.
Right, exactly. Which was socialism with the German face. That was Nazism. So
yeah. So we should. I'm not saying that China is going to be the worst ever, but it should be on everyone's radar, and we should not be treating it as if it's not a problem to put all the factories in the world in China.
Yeah, that should be an obvious problem. Would we have done that with Soviet Russia? Let's give all the factories to Soviet Russia. Shouldn't be a problem. Everything should go fine.
There might be issues. So Trump has convinced me through his actions, first of all, that he has very good humor, extremely good humor, and that Scott Adams has convinced me that he's doing this on purpose, that he's an incredibly smart guy, very persuasive, and he's been doing this kind of stuff for 50, 60 years. And he's so good at it after being in the slums of New York, and the business world of New York. You have to be really rough in New York, and so surviving in New York means that you take your kid gloves off, and that's what he has done. And he has honed this fighting ability for like 50 years. So we have a world champion fighter in the White House now. He fights.
I agree, but he wanted to sit down with the Taliban, and that's what John Bolton disagreed with him over, and so he canceled the meeting with the Taliban, and John Bolton resigned. So, I mean, I haven't been more worried about anything since the last time I was worried about something Trump did. He worries me a lot, and then he always straightens it out.
Yeah, and this is the thing. It doesn't sound so good just on the facts, but I've learned that you can't take anything that Trump does at face value. He's always playing 4D chess. Mm-hmm. For instance, this is just like one of these freaking brilliant moves. You know, when the El Paso shooting was, there was 2 shootings, but the media only focused on the one that was allegedly right-wing, even though he said he hated Trump and blah, blah, blah. But then he said it might be worth considering red flag laws. He said that, and everyone was like, "What?" And the left, yeah, that's good, yeah, like that. And the day after this, he said that there was a Democrat presidential candidate who said something crazy, and he says, "This guy here should not be owning guns. I think we better start thinking about these red flag laws very soon."
For this Democrat, yeah.
And it's like, in that tweet, he undermined red flag laws, and he did it on purpose. So the first, he had it's like a joke. You have to set up a joke. So a joke isn't funny if you just go straight to the point. You have a build-up phase, and then comes the funny twist at the end. So first you had the El Paso shooting, which is not funny. So I'm not trying to make it fun of the El Paso shooting. But then he starts his 4D chess move, which is red flag laws, which takes away all the energy from the El Paso shooting. Now everyone is talking about red flag laws. So he has achieved his goal of wiping out this now from the news. And when everyone now has said that Trump is either a genius because he wants to have red flag laws, or he's crazy because he wants to have red flag laws, then the next day he says, this Democrat here, he shouldn't be owning guns. We should have red flag laws. Absolutely brilliant, because he then first he killed the El Paso story. No longer were people talking that, and then he killed the red flag laws by saying something that was so dictatorial, and he was blamed for being dictatorial. But everyone who is not have Trump derangement syndrome understood that he was doing that on purpose.
Yeah.
So everyone was having a good laugh, except for the Trump derangement people who were like, impeach, he's a dictator.
They did recently hold a rally to impeach. They wanted the representatives to focus back on impeachment. They held a rally on the Capitol steps at noon on Sunday.
Trump has a very
nobody
relaxed.
Came.
Oh yeah. Trump has a very relaxed relationship with impeachment. He says, if I don't get impeached, that's nice. If I do get impeached, well, that's nice too. Because if he gets impeached, he will get reelected like that, just like Bill Clinton. Yeah, got all the the approval rating of Bill Clinton when he was impeached, and he did something that wasn't quite good, right?
And then lied about it. Yeah.
So he got a 70% approval rating after he was impeached. because it was just such an insane thing to drag him through the mud on personal issues. So he lied about sex, like most people would do that. It's not right to do that, but it's like what you can say is that the Republicans weaponized sex and personal life, which is why they think that it's fair game to Kavanaugh. So in one sense, the Republicans open up the door to the Kavanaugh attacks.
Well, while all that was going on and we were paying attention to that, the Clintons were selling our nuclear secrets to China. So
yeah, and the uranium to Russia.
Yeah, exactly. And so what were the Republicans doing while all that was going on? Worrying about some blowjob he got in the White House?
Yeah. So the Republicans can't be accused of being the smartest people and the sharpest tools in the shed, so to speak. They're always fooled, sadly. But Trump has now been changing this a lot. And it's interesting to see how it's just taken over the party. Notice the difference between what's going on with the Republican Party and the Conservatives, the Tories, in Britain. I don't know if you've been paying attention to the Brexit situation there, but Boris Johnson is basically been subject to a coup d'etat by 20 members of parliament who wants to crash the whole Brexit process. So it's like literally like a coup, and they blocked him from having these snap elections and all of that stuff. And compare that to the situation where you had these same coup people in America, the Never Trumpers, who tried to stop him, and he was just able to, he had a rough 1 year where he actually had a rough 2 years. The Never Trumpers, the reason he never built the wall in the first 2 years and they never did anything on healthcare and all of that is because of the Never Trumpers in his own party. He wasn't able to get the support he needed in Congress because of Republicans.
Yeah.
Those people now lost to the Democrats. So the Never Trumpers are out. They're being retired.
And the 2 years that they had to make a difference were gone for stupid. They should have been able to do something, but they were fighting Trump.
Yes. But unlike Boris Johnson, which has real problems on his hands, and it's like almost like a civil war situation, Trump has actually been able to do a lot of things despite not having a majority in Congress.
Yeah.
And he's a lot of that has been executive orders,
yeah,
but not all of it. And he's finally been able to start building the wall based on Ann Coulter's idea of using the military funds and all of that. But and Ann Coulter was very angry with him for not doing it from day one. But the problem is, and this is something that probably is true, it's that he couldn't do it from day one because he had to clean away a lot of obstacles, a lot of deep staters, a lot of Never Trumpers, a lot of people who were stopping him from doing this. But he was playing the long game, and now it's working. And his ultra long game is if he wins this election again, and I'm pretty sure he will, and there's pretty good reason for believing that, then in 2022, for the next congressional election, he's going to win back majority for the Republicans.
If the Republicans still exist.
Yeah, but I think they still exist, but the Republicans will now be the party of Trump.
Yeah, well, it'll now. Yeah, he's libertarian. I think he's more libertarian than Republican. The Republicans, whatever they were probably represented by the 16 candidates that were on the stage with Trump, right? I mean, if the Republican Party's anything and it's not Trump, then it must be those 16 guys, right? Who were on the stage at the beginning. And those guys were nothing. Nobody supported any of them. They were all garbage. They're gone.
Yes. So in other words, Trump has just basically cleaned the house. And now if he's supporting candidates, and he did this in 2018, people don't know this, but he specifically went to various places and held rallies for people who were his guys. And he was able to put people in Congress who were Trump supporters for the Republicans. So people think that people only think in terms of Republicans and Democrats. And if you look at that, the Republicans won. But if you instead look at just the Republican Party and you look at the amount of Trump supporters in the Republican Party in 2016, and then you look after 2018, the total number of Republicans has gone down, but the number of Trumpers in there has gone up. So he's gaining, Trump's gain in the election in 2018. And he's going to do the same again in 2022.
Yeah, I hope so.
I believe.
Yeah, and I hope he'll be reelected. I think he will be. I think it's going to be a fair landslide.
Think about it this way. Bill Whittle makes this, not Bill Whittle, Scott Odd, his sidekick, he makes this comment. No, actually it's Bill Whittle. He makes this point all the time, and he makes it to Scott Odd. He says, I know a lot of people who didn't vote Trump in 2016. They were never Trumpers, they were Republicans, who say now that they're going to vote Trump in 2020. But he hasn't met a single Republican Trump voter who said, I voted for Trump in 2016, but I'm not going to do it in 2020. So you're going to have an effect where there's only going to be more Republicans voting for Trump in 2020 than in 2016.
Yeah, who has gotten mad and left the Trump train? Not very many, but a lot of people have joined it.
Yes, and if you look at, for instance, blacks, he was literally Hitler, like Trump, in 2016. But now you have Candace Owens, and you have Kanye West, and you have record jobs among blacks, and you have record low unemployment, record high increase in wages, blah, 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 blah. And you have prison reform, blah, blah, blah. A lot of things that doesn't make him look like literally Hitler, right? He looks more attractive. So, and if you look at his approval among blacks, it's at record levels. And it's not just like for him, but for Republicans. You have to go back a long time, far back in time, to find blacks being so enthusiastic about a Republican president.
Yeah, like Abraham Lincoln type far.
No, not that far, but before 1933, before FDR.
Uh-huh.
I think that's what we're talking about, because that's when the switch occurred from the Republicans. It was during the Ku Klux Klan FDR period. And they didn't vote for the Democrats because they liked the Ku Klux Klan, but because it was just a hard time and they were opting for Social Security. And the Democrats were the party of the Social Security. So now we're seeing a rush back to the Republican Party, and that from the blacks. And if you look at the Hispanics, even like among the legal Hispanics, he had a higher approval rating among Hispanics in America who spoke English-speaking Hispanics, than among ordinary Americans, like the rest of America.
Yeah. Well, they're some of the maddest about this illegal immigration. They come here legally, and they get a life and everything, and then the neighborhoods they live in, the Mexican-American neighborhoods they live in, are packed full of illegal immigrants, making housing more expensive, taking jobs, and bringing crime. So the Mexican-Americans who come here legally are some of the most upset about the illegal immigrants.
And not only that, they are upset about this Spanish stuff too. Tulsi Gabbard, one of the sane Democrat presidential candidates, not because of her policies, but because she loves America. She was on Dave Rubin's show recently, and she said Dave Rubin commented that she was pretty much the only candidate on stage that didn't speak Spanish. She could have spoken Spanish because she knows Spanish, but she deliberately only spoke English. And she said, yes, she did that on purpose because she didn't want to do that.
On immigration.
In America, you speak American. And she said that when she was in a rally in, I think it was New York, there was a woman from South America, I don't know which country. She came over to her and grabbed her arm, and she said to her, like, don't speak Spanish like the other candidates. Speak English. And this was a Hispanic woman who said this to her, and she really appreciated that a Democrat actually spoke American, right? She didn't come to this country just speak the country of socialism, the language of socialism. Those who come here and become Americans and adopt the English language and adopt the American flag and adopt American values, they come here to become Americans, not to have Mexico as their next door neighbor. That's not what they came here for. And those are a sizable amount. I mean, they may not be a majority, but they are a significant portion. And among the English-speaking Hispanics, I think his approval rating was 52% or something like that. Trump, I mean.
Yeah. Yeah, it's gotten really high among blacks, too. And black women particularly, which vote Democrat in very high numbers. There's that couple of black women who make fun of libtards.
Yeah.
And they are changing the whole scene in black America, and black women are leaving the Democratic Party and supporting Trump. So,
yeah.
It's a beautiful thing.
So, and the thing is, if blacks switch to the Republican Party, and they don't have to switch fully, they just have to go from 10% today to 30%. Then it's game over for the Democrats. Yeah. That's all.
And the Mexicans too. If we can get a lot of Hispanics over to the Republican side, then it's, if we get all the whites, a bunch of blacks, and a bunch of Hispanics, that's enough that Republicans can run the country with that.
Yeah, we don't get all the whites because we have the libtards and the crazy progressives. Almost all the truly nasty, evil people in America are whites.
They're in New York and California as well.
Yes, they have no connection with reality.
The white people in California and New York are the bad people in America.
No, actually, not in California, but in San Francisco and Los Angeles. Actually, if it just do this as an exercise. Look up a map of how people voted in 2016 based on county. Map of voting 2016 America county. Look at that map.
And what am I looking at? What, the California area you want to look at?
Oh, well, look at the whole country, but then when you've looked at the whole country, look at California.
Yeah, so it's got some significant red areas.
Basically, California is red.
It's just
look at.
It's just right along the coast in the LA area, and the San Francisco area and the coast. It's the coast. The Inland Empire, where all the farming goes on, is red. They vote Republican.
And even in Los Angeles, in progressive Los Angeles, 30% of whites are Republicans. That's not insignificant.
Yeah, the Republican Party has the future. I mean, the Democrats say once they win the demographic war, no Republican will ever be elected again. But that assumes that these people keep voting Democrat. And a lot of them are walking away from the Democrats because the Democrats are totally insane.
Well, at the moment they're insane, but the thing you have to understand is that socialists from South America or from any other place in the world, they will tend to keep on voting socialists or opportunistic, but they're not going to vote for crazy policies that's not in their interests. So if you have all this transgender talk and you have Catholic Mexicans, they're not going to be so happy about that. And they have to be bribed with a lot of goodies in order to accept transgender bathrooms, right?
And
so they are going to pinch their nose and vote Democrat. But many people are now walking away because the divide is too big. So, but all the Democrats have to do in order to avoid that is just not to be crazy. And so they can come back. They can just say, okay, this progressive thing was a nice thing, but now we're going to use Tulsi Gabbard as our candidate, and then they win.
Yeah, they can come back any moment. They can pull it back from the insanity.
Yeah, it's no problem coming back. So the long term, the demographic is important. It's really important. And therefore, it's important also to have respect for the momentum of culture. It takes 7 generations to turn a cultural ship around. And America can't afford 7 generations of socialism if we're just letting in all the 5 billion socialists out there, or not necessarily socialists, but opportunists who will vote as far left as they can.
Now, what the 7 generations thing, I don't know, I don't get that. What about Hong Kong and Singapore? Didn't they turn around pretty fast?
Partially, but think about it like this. They turned around very fast, but they did it by even a form of central rule. There was no democracy in Hong Kong. You have the British came in there, and they say, this is how we're going to do it, right?
Well, so that's like the American Constitution was simply put in place. We didn't hold elections for the Constitution. We just wrote it and ratified it. And
yes.
Iraq does not have freedom today. The reason they don't have freedom today is because they had elections.
Yes.
So elections don't bring you freedom. Elections won't change the culture. No. But the government can enforce rules.
Yeah, and in Singapore, they basically had a near one-party system with the People's Action Party under Lee Kuan Yew. And people say they weren't really democratic, and there's some truth to that, but they were sufficiently democratic that they were wildly popular with the vast majority of the people. And what they basically did, they put in place so meritocratic and good rule that no one had anything to complain about. So so they were sort of giving out a sufficient amount of crumbs to the lower classes so that no one would vote communist and all of these things. But at the same time, they kept things clean. So Singapore and Hong Kong are good examples of what you can achieve in just a few generations if it's done in a very good way. But that doesn't happen organically, or very rarely happen organically. In other words, in both those cases, you had a central government behind this. And you had a very special situation in Singapore, where Singapore was in lifeboat ethics kind of situation. They were coming out of a civil war with Malaysia, and Malaysia wanted them to be destroyed. Indonesia hated them. Everyone around them hated them. And they were this tiny, tiny little island, and they were just like 1 mile away from one neighbor who hated them, and they were 5 miles away from another neighbor who hated them. So what do you do when you do that? Well, you run the most brutally efficient economic system you can think about just to survive, which was capitalism.
Or they would have disappeared.
Yes. And since they didn't disappear, well, it just means that they made the good choice. And that's why we know about Singapore today. No one had known about Singapore if they turned to communism, right?
Right. They would have just been overrun and been another backwater like Laos or Myanmar.
That's right. So no one would have cared. So the reason we know about Hong Kong and Singapore is because they're exceptional. No one went down that path. And they were, notice the similarity, they were very small islands. Hong Kong is shockingly small. And I'm talking about the original Hong Kong island. Have you ever been to Hong Kong?
No.
Well, you should definitely go both to Singapore and to Hong Kong. You can walk across Singapore in 1 day.
So it's 20 miles or something like that. Something like that. Pretty small then, huh?
It's less than 20 miles.
Yeah, I should go. I don't think I'll ever go to Hong Kong. Not while China owns it.
Oh no! Yeah, that's true. But go to Hong Kong is so ridiculously small. It's much small. Like the main Hong Kong island, the one that the British were concerned with mostly, is just like that. It's so small. Like I walked across Hong Kong. I did that, and I walked into you can walk across the main island in a short amount of time. And most people to go mountain hiking, they start down by the bay and they walk up, and they take a trip walking around all of Hong Kong. And so there's lots of hiking opportunities.
Yeah, it looks like there's a couple of really big parks there on the main island.
Yeah, and same with Singapore. Singapore is just tiny. And most of it is just a big park.
Most of Singapore is a park.
Yeah, 1/3 of Singapore is like a national park.
Interesting. Yeah, they don't have a lot of room to. Yeah, they do have a lot of park space there. I hadn't noticed.
40% of the populated area is canopy.
Reminds me of New York City with the enormous Central Park in the middle.
Yeah, except this is a centralized policy where they say whenever you build a new area, there has to be trees. There has to be park areas so that we have canopy. This keeps the temperature down, and people like green. So this is just like built in as an infrastructure of the island, that there has to be green areas.
Interesting.
And it hasn't slowed down Singapore at all. In fact, it has been very beneficial to Singapore, because they don't. Whereas all the other large cities in the world has experienced massive warming due to the urban heat island effect. Singapore has had no temperature increase in almost 30 years.
Yeah, I actually heard a ridiculous story about a guy who wanted to use solar panels for his heating and cooling in Washington, D.C. So they cut down all the trees around his house and put solar panels on so that the trees didn't block the sun. And then his heating bill went way, way up because the trees weren't blocking the sun anymore.
That's right. So that's a good example. Now, Singapore has done so many things right. I mean, anyone who wants to study good governance just needs to stay in Singapore for a long time, because they've done almost everything right. There's something bad thing sneaking in right now with progressive ideas, but generally speaking, they are just super duper good at almost anything. Like even healthcare and the traffic and the criminal law there, everything works just really nice, despite being not a full-blown laissez-faire capitalist society. But they're very close to that. But so I would call them a capitalist with a strong tinge of nationalism in it. So they're always thinking in the national interest, want to avoid populist uprise. That's their guiding principle, and they've done very well. So the reason that Singapore and Hong Kong are such good examples of how fast you can transform a society is because they are almost like little labs. They're tiny, tiny islands that were born out of very, very special circumstances. Now, this shows the innate potential in human beings for transformation, right? But that's not your average case.
All right, so you're saying that culture is sticky for 7 generations
On the average.
on average cases. It's not very sticky for people who come to America, or are you saying it is?
It is. It depends on where you get your paycheck from.
So culture can be sticky depending on where you get paid?
Yes. If you get paid from the government, culture is very sticky. Hispanic people in America who speak Spanish and refuse to learn English, they do so because they can go get free government money and send their kids to public schools.
Okay, so like in Singapore and Hong Kong, though, we could change people's culture by just...
Oh, yeah, we can. But we have a war in America with people trying to prevent us from doing that. They're called the Democrats.
Right, so we've got to be careful about culture because of the Democrats trying to use it as a weapon against us.
Yes. We are in the middle of a warfare, cultural warfare, demographic warfare, where the Democrats know that they can't win on policies alone. They can't win on arguments. So they win on appealing to opportunism among people from corrupt socialist regimes.
Well, I have got to go to the store for cigarettes. Shall we draw a line here?
That sounds good.
All right, we've been going for 2 hours and 12 minutes, which is a little longer than our normal time span, but that's all right.
I think we covered a lot of good ground here, and the first hour was Rucka only, but then we veered into a lot of interesting stuff with Trump and a lot of other stuff.
Yeah, what shall we title it? Rucka, or what shall it be? Rucka, Racism, and Trump?
Something like that, yeah.
Rucka and Racism Part 1, Trump Part 2.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Something like that.
Thanks a lot, Onar. We'll plan on probably Sunday for our usual thing.
Yeah, that's good.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks a lot. See you around.
Take care.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate you coming on. Thank you for joining me. And go to Patreon and support me if you appreciate what I do here and these conversations we're having. And if we're making any progress or building something, and you think that this is a good thing we're doing, please join in. Mr. Cropper out.